Reserve Forest. February 1943. A German helmet, visible above a fallen log, 400 meters northeast. Ivan Sidorenko had been watching it for 90 minutes. It hadn't moved once. No breath vapor in the cold. No adjustment to wind. No shift of position. Finally, he understood. It was a decoy. Then the wind changed. The helmet tilted slightly. 200 meters behind it, movement. A German observer raised binoculars for perhaps 2 seconds, checking to see if anyone had shot at the bait. That micro-reaction revealed everything. Sidorenko exhaled slowly, compensated for the distance, and fired once. The observer dropped. This was the moment that would change sniper warfare on the Eastern Front. Not the kill itself, the realization that came before it. The hunters could become the hunted. Eastern Front, winter 1942 to 1943. The Battle of Reserve had been grinding through its second year. Soviet casualties exceeded 2 million men. German Army Group Center held a salient threatening Moscow, only 200 kilometers away. The forested terrain created perfect conditions for sniper warfare. Dense birch and pine, with visibility limited to 50, perhaps 150 meters. Both sides deployed counter-sniper units. The Germans had been training snipers since 1939. Their marksmen carried Zeiss scopes and operated with systematic doctrine. Soviet snipers, though numerous, were dying at catastrophic rates. Average lifespan of the front, 6 days. Sidorenko's unit lost 11 snipers in 14 days during January 1943. 11 men. 14 days. 6-day average survival rate. The Germans weren't simply shooting. They were hunting. They studied patterns. They waited for Soviet snipers to follow doctrine. Shoot 3 to 5 times, then relocate. Predictable. Lethal. On January 18th, Sidorenko watched through binoculars as his friend, Dmitry Kulikov, fired his third shot at a German position. 4 seconds later, a round punched through Kulikov's skull. The German counter-sniper had triangulated his position perfectly, waited for confirmation, then eliminated him. Soviet training doctrine was killing Soviet snipers. Conventional counter-sniper tactics weren't working. Standard procedure called for optical searches to detect scope glint, systematic observation of suspected areas, suppressive fire to force enemy snipers to reveal positions. None of it worked against patient German hunters who could wait 6, 8, 10 hours without moving. Soviet snipers operated on timed schedules, arrive at position at dawn, engage targets until 1400 hours, return before dusk. German observers learned these patterns. They prepared ambushes during predictable rotation times. By February 1943, Sidorenko understood the fundamental problem. Soviet doctrine made snipers into targets. Predictable targets. The Germans had turned Soviet training against them. He needed to reverse the dynamic completely. Make the hunters reveal themselves. But how do you bait men who have infinite patience? The answer came from 9 hours of terror. Stories like this exist in fragments across military archives and veteran accounts. They deserve to reach those who value them. If this account held meaning for you, consider helping others discover it. A like tells the algorithm to share this with similar audiences. Subscribing to the channel and enabling notifications ensures these stories reach you when new accounts are published. Your engagement becomes a form of historical preservation, connecting those who seek this knowledge with those who've taken time to document it properly. Chapter 1. The Trap. He couldn't move. Any shift, any breath visible in the cold, and the German would put a round through his skull. February 3rd, 1943. Sidorenko had taken position before dawn in his usual hide, a depression beneath a fallen birch, covered with snow-dusted branches. At 0730, he fired at a German supply courier crossing a clearing. Clean hit. The man dropped. Standard engagement. Then the countershot came. The round passed 6 centimeters above his head, splintering the birch trunk behind him. A German sniper had him triangulated, but couldn't get a clean shot through the trees. Any movement to relocate would expose him. So he stayed absolutely still. For 9 hours. By hour 3, his bladder screamed. By hour 5, his legs cramped. By hour 7, he'd stopped feeling his feet. The temperature held at -15°C. He breathed through his nose, shallow breaths, watching the vapor disperse slowly into the winter air. Too much visible breath would give away his exact position. The German was patient, professional, waiting for the inevitable mistake. But Sidorenko had grown up alone in forests. Before the war, he'd worked as a ranger near Smolensk, tracking wolves through terrain exactly like this. 12-hour shifts alone, motionless in tree stands, waiting for movement. The army thought his silence was weakness. His commanders dismissed him as too passive. But patience wasn't weakness. Patience was a weapon. During hour 6, he noticed a German helmet, 400 meters northeast, visible above a fallen log. At first, he assumed it was a German sniper in position. But as minutes became hours, he realized it never moved. No adjustment to wind. No scope glint. No breath vapor. Nothing. It was a decoy. The Germans were using them too, creating false targets, waiting to see if Soviet snipers would reveal themselves by shooting. Standard counter-sniper doctrine. Sidorenko had heard the tactic, but never seen it deployed. Then, during hour 8, the wind shifted. The helmet tilted slightly on its mounting, and 200 meters behind it, a German observer briefly raised binoculars to check if anyone had taken the bait. 2 seconds of exposure. Just 2 seconds. But that was the vulnerability. That was the opening. When someone checks a decoy, they reveal their actual position. The realization came slowly, crystallizing through the fog of cold and exhaustion. The Germans used decoys to identify enemy sniper positions. But checking those decoys created a pattern. A micro-exposure. A tell. What if he created decoys that Germans couldn't resist shooting? What if he turned their own methodology against them? Make them reveal themselves by attacking targets that looked valuable but weren't real. At 1600 hours, the light began failing. The German sniper, knowing Sidorenko couldn't move before dark without being killed, apparently decided the target had either died of exposure or would stay pinned until morning. Sidorenko heard movement in the tree line, the distinctive sound of someone withdrawing from a position. Careful, professional, but withdrawing. He waited another 40 minutes. Full darkness. Then he moved. His legs barely responded. He crawled 30 meters to alternate cover before attempting to stand. When circulation returned to his feet, the pain was extraordinary. He made it back to Soviet lines at 1900 hours, 9 hours after the countershot that pinned him. That night, he didn't sleep. He was too busy calculating how to turn the Germans' own method against them. He needed German helmets. Soviet helmets wouldn't work. The profile was wrong. He needed wooden stakes to mount them at proper height. He needed to position them in tactically sound locations where real snipers would actually operate. He needed to bait the hunters. Before dawn on February 4th, he was crawling through no man's land, collecting helmets from German casualties. Chapter 2. The Blueprint. Before dawn, he was collecting helmets from dead Germans in no man's land. The Stahlhelm had a distinctive profile. That coal scuttle shape was instantly recognizable, even at distance. Soviet SSH 40 helmets wouldn't work. German snipers knew the difference. If the decoys looked Soviet, they'd assume Soviet snipers and be cautious. If they looked German, confusion, questions, hesitation that might make them expose themselves longer while assessing. He collected 4 helmets that first night, each one from casualties at least 3 days dead. Fresh bodies drew attention, and he couldn't risk German patrols investigating disturbances in no man's land. He worked quickly, efficiently, with the methodical precision he'd developed tracking wolves. Never hurry. Never make unnecessary sound. Move when wind covers noise. Back behind Soviet lines, he began the construction. Birch saplings, cut to 60 to 80 centimeters. That height matched a prone sniper's position when firing from ground level. Too tall, and they'd look like standing soldiers. Too short, and the angle would be wrong. He shaved the bark from one end to create a point for driving into frozen ground. The other end, he notched to hold the helmet rim. By February 8th, he had 9 decoys ready. The positioning geometry was critical. He spent 2 hours before dawn on the 8th studying the terrain through binoculars. He needed positions that looked tactically sound, places where a competent sniper would actually set up. Good fields of fire. Natural concealment. Covered approaches. If he put decoys in stupid positions, Germans would immediately recognize them as false. But if he put them where snipers genuinely operated, Germans would have to investigate. He created a 300-meter radius network. 8 decoys positioned at varying distances, some at 100 meters, some at 200, the farthest at 280. The variation was intentional. If all decoys were equidistant, the pattern would look artificial. Nature doesn't create perfect geometry. Neither should his deception. The 9th decoy he positioned in a genuinely stupid location. Too exposed, too obvious. That one was pure bait. If Germans shot it at first, they weren't trained professionals. If they ignored it and checked the tactically sound positions, they were specialists. Either way, he'd learned something about who was hunting him. He positioned himself 40 meters behind the decoy network, in a depression beneath a deadfall where he had clear sight lines to all 9 positions. From here, he could see any German sniper who investigated the decoys. More critically, he could see muzzle flash if they fired. The waiting was the hardest part. Not the shooting, not the stalking, the waiting. Holding position for hours, watching multiple points simultaneously, maintaining awareness without letting attention drift. Most men couldn't do it. Their minds wandered. They got bored. They made mistakes. But Sidorenko had spent 5 years as a forest ranger, sitting in tree stands for 12 hours at a time, waiting for wolves that might never come. The army thought his silence meant he was slow. His commanders thought his patience meant he lacked aggression. They were wrong on both counts. Patience wasn't the absence of aggression. Patience was aggression extended across time. At 10:47 hours, a German fired at decoy position 3. Muzzle flash. Northeast. 380 meters. The German had chosen one of the tactically sound positions. A corner with good downward angles and 2 directions of cover. A position a real sniper would use. Which meant this German was trained. At 10:52, the same German fired again. Decoy position 7. Apparently trying to confirm both kills. Make sure both positions were neutralized. 2 shots. 2 muzzle flashes. 2 opportunities to triangulate his position. Sidorenko calculated the range. 380 meters. The 7.62x 54 mmR round would drop approximately 1.2 meters over that distance in these conditions. He compensated, exhaled slowly, and fired once. The German dropped. First validation. The system worked. But one success didn't mean the method was proven. It meant the Germans would adapt. The real test would come when they learned what he was doing. Chapter 3. First Blood. 10:47 hours. Muzzle flash. 380 meters northeast. February 8th. First deployment of the decoy system. Sidorenko had been in position since 0500, watching the 9 decoys scattered across the forest. The temperature held at -12. Wind from the west, at 8 kilometers per hour. Visibility good. The morning fog had burned off by 0900. For 5 hours, nothing. The decoys stood silent, motionless. He began wondering if Germans would even check this sector today. Perhaps they'd shifted their counter-sniper operations elsewhere. Then, at 10:47, a German fired at decoy position 3. The crack of a carabiner 98K echoed through the trees. Sidorenko's eyes snapped to the position. The decoy, a Stahlhelm mounted on birch stake, positioned at the base of fallen pine, rocked slightly from the impact. The German had aimed center mass, exactly where a prone sniper's torso would be. Professional shot. From someone trained. Sidorenko tracked the muzzle flash origin. Northeast treeline, elevated position, approximately 380 meters. He marked the location mentally, watching for movement. The German would likely wait to see if the target reacted. Standard doctrine, one shot might be a miss. Wait for target confirmation before assuming kill. 5 minutes passed. Then the German fired again. Decoy position 7, 200 meters west of position 3. The second decoy jerked from the impact. 2 shots. The German was apparently trying to confirm multiple kills. Make sure the sector was cleared of Soviet snipers. Classic counter-sniper sweep pattern. Clear the zone systematically. Verify each position is neutralized. But each shot revealed his position more precisely. Sidorenko calculated the range. 380 meters. His 7.62x 54 mmR round would drop 1.2 meters at that distance, given current temperature and wind. He adjusted his scope, compensated for the drop, and centered the crosshairs on the elevated position where the muzzle flash had originated. The target was partially obscured by pine branches. Sidorenko could see the outline of a German soldier, prone position, still observing the decoys he'd just shot, waiting for movement, waiting for confirmation. Sidorenko exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger. The Mosin kicked against his shoulder. Through the scope, he saw the German's body jerk, then go still. No secondary movement. No attempt to withdraw. Clean hit. He maintained position for another hour, observing. Standard procedure. Verify the kill. Ensure no second German was operating as spotter. At 1200 hours, satisfy the area was clear, he withdrew. First validation of a decoy system. One German counter-sniper eliminated. The method worked. But this raised immediate questions. Would Germans recognize the pattern? Would they adapt? How long before they understood they were being baited and stopped shooting at suspicious positions? The race between innovation and adaptation had begun. Sidorenko knew he had perhaps 2 weeks, maybe 3, before German command analyzed the casualties and issued new counter-sniper protocols. He needed to refine the system, make it better, make it harder to detect. Chapter 4. Evolution. He added something new. Movement. Week 2 of operations. February 15th through 22nd. Sidorenko had achieved 6 kills in 9 days using static decoys. Germans were becoming more cautious. They observed positions longer before firing. They probed suspicious areas with binoculars, checking for signs of deception. Static decoys worked, but he could make them better. The innovation came from watching wind move branches. Natural movement didn't register as threat. Wind moved everything equally. But what if he could create selective movement that mimicked human adjustment? A sniper shifting position slightly. A helmet turning to scan different angles. He acquired fishing line from a supply sergeant who thought the request was insane. Monofilament, 0.3 millimeters diameter. 40 meters of it. Thin enough to be nearly invisible against snow and bark. Strong enough to withstand winter wind without breaking. He rigged 3 decoys with a line. Each decoy connected to his position 40 meters away. A gentle pull created 8 to 12 centimeters of movement at the decoy position, enough to simulate a sniper adjusting position, but subtle enough to look natural. Too much movement would look artificial. Too little would be indistinguishable from wind. The fishing line physics required experimentation. A 40-meter pull created different movement, depending on line tension and anchor points. He spent 2 nights testing various configurations until he achieved realistic motion. The line had to be taut enough to transmit pull, slack enough to not vibrate visibly. He added a second refinement: partial uniforms. German camouflage smocks, scavenged from casualties. He draped them over some decoys, creating silhouettes that looked like snipers in ghillie suits. The visual confusion was deliberate. Was this a German position or Soviet? The ambiguity would force Germans to spend more time observing, which meant more exposure time for Sidorenko. By the 3rd week, he developed a 3-tier decoy system. Priority decoys, positioned in premium tactical locations. Corners with 2 angles of cover. Elevated positions with downward fields of fire. Places where expert snipers would genuinely operate. These receive the most realistic construction. Fishing line movement, partial uniforms, careful camouflage integration. Standard decoys, solid positions but not premium. Good enough to draw investigation from competent snipers, but not obvious enough to seem like bait. These used basic helmet-on-stay construction, no movement systems. Bait decoys, deliberately poor positions. Too exposed, too obvious. These filtered German competence. Professionals ignored them. Amateurs shot at them. Either way, Sidorenko learned about enemy skill levels. At peak complexity, he operated a 12 decoy network. Managing 12 positions required systematic observation patterns. He divided his field of view into 3 zones, scanning each zone every 90 seconds. Any muzzle flash in any zone would be detected within that time frame. The results validated the refinements. Week 3, 8 kills. Week 4, 11 kills. By the end of February, he'd eliminated 17 German countersnipers using the evolved system. But Germans were adapting too. They began approaching suspicious positions from multiple angles, using coordination between spotter teams. They checked for fishing line by throwing stones near decoys, watching for unnatural movement. They marked positions that looked too perfect and avoided them entirely. The tactical evolution was mutual. Each side learned from the other. Sidorenko's innovation forced German adaptation, which forced his counter-adaptation. The cycle accelerated through March. He added wire triggers to some decoys. When Germans probed with sticks, the decoy would fall over convincingly, as if a real body had been killed. He created wounded decoys that appear to be snipers hit but not killed, triggering German impulse to finish the target. By March 15th, he'd achieved 47 confirmed kills in 6 weeks of operations, the highest count of any Soviet sniper in the Reserve sector during that period. But success attracts attention. German command was noticing too many counter-snipers dying in one sector. They were sending specialists. Chapter 5. Psychological Warfare. He started leaving bodies. Not real bodies. Decoy bodies. But the psychological effect was real. March 1943. Sidorenko had been operating his decoy network for 5 weeks. 17 kills using the system. Germans were adapting, becoming more cautious, taking longer to investigate suspicious positions. He needed to accelerate their decision-making, force them to make mistakes under psychological pressure. The innovation was simple but disturbing. He began leaving one decoy visibly killed, a helmet with an obvious bullet hole, positioned as if the sniper behind it had been eliminated. Germans who observed this would conclude the area had been checked and cleared. False security. They'd become less cautious when operating near the cleared position. Then he'd set up fresh decoys nearby. When Germans entered the supposedly safe zone, they'd expose themselves more freely, believing the threat had been neutralized. It worked immediately. March 8th. He positioned a killed decoy at a corner position. 70 meters away, he set up 3 fresh decoys. That afternoon, a German sniper moved through the area, passed within 20 meters of the dead position without taking cover, and began setting up his own observation post. The German believed the sector was safe. He was wrong. Sidorenko killed him from 340 meters. But the psychological tactics went deeper. He began creating German-style decoy networks near Soviet lines. Using captured German equipment, helmets, smocks, even German-issue camouflage, he built positions that looked like German counter-sniper setups. The goal was doctrinal confusion. If German commanders saw their own methodology being deployed against them, they'd start questioning which positions were genuinely theirs and which were Soviet deceptions. The effect was exactly what he anticipated. German counter-sniper coordination began breaking down. On March 14th, 2 German sniper teams apparently engaged each other, believing one team was Soviet-controlled. Both withdrew with casualties. Neither realized they'd shot their own men. Sidorenko didn't cause that fratricide directly, but his systematic use of German equipment and German tactical patterns created an environment where German snipers couldn't trust their own doctrine. Every position that looked German might be German, or might be Soviet. The uncertainty was paralyzing. By late March, he'd achieved 17 kills that month alone, 47 total since February 8th. The numbers were unprecedented. No Soviet sniper in the Reserve sector had survived 6 weeks, much less achieved this kill count. But there was weight to it. 47 men, each one someone's son, brother, father. Sidorenko had grown up hunting wolves, not humans. Wolves were predators. Killing them protected livestock, protected people. These were men, trained men, professional soldiers doing their duty, same as him. He didn't allow himself to think about it during operations. Thinking interfered with function. But at night, when he returned to Soviet lines, the faces accumulated. He never saw them clearly through the scope. Distance prevented that. But his mind filled in details anyway. Age, expression, the moment of impact. Some snipers kept counts on their rifles. Carved notches. Celebrated kills. Sidorenko refused. The number mattered for military records, for doctrine validation, for proving the method worked. But celebrating death felt wrong. These men would have killed him without hesitation. He killed them first. That was survival, not sport. Still, 47 was 47, a number that carried weight. German command noticed. Too many counter-snipers dying in one sector. Too many casualties following similar patterns. Killed while investigating suspicious positions. killed while checking decoys, killed by precise single shots from unknown positions. In May 1943, they sent specialists, men who'd been hunting Soviet snipers for 18 months, men with 43 confirmed kills, men who trained specifically to identify and eliminate decoy tactics. Sidorenko was about to face hunters who understood exactly what he was doing. Chapter 6. The Hunters. May 1943. They sent a team that had killed 43 Soviet snipers. The German elite counter-sniper unit arrived in the Rezev sector on May 2nd. Sidorenko didn't know they were there until he went 3 weeks without a single kill. 3 weeks. 0 results. That was the tell. Professional hunters didn't fall for decoys. They observed for 6, 8, sometimes 10 hours before acting. They checked for fishing line by watching how positions moved in wind, natural movement versus mechanical. They probed with thrown stones, looking for unnatural responses. They marked positions that looked too perfect tactically and avoided them entirely. These weren't regular Wehrmacht marksmen. These were specialists, graduates of German sniper schools, veterans of 18 months hunting Soviet snipers across the Eastern Front. They'd been briefed on decoy tactics. They'd seen these methods before. They knew what Sidorenko was doing. For 3 weeks, he operated his 12 decoy network. 0 German investigations. 0 shots fired at decoys. 0 kills. The stalemate was maddening. He'd achieved 47 kills in 6 weeks using this system, but against trained specialists, it produced nothing. They were too disciplined, too patient. They wouldn't bite at obvious bait. The tactical problem was fundamental. His method required Germans to investigate suspicious positions. But these specialists didn't investigate. They observed from concealment, identified patterns, and either avoided decoy-heavy sectors entirely or approached from unexpected angles that bypassed his observation posts. By May 23rd, Sidorenko faced a decision. Continue the current system and accept 0 effectiveness, or adapt again. But adapt how? The specialists had already seen his tactics. They knew the decoy patterns. They knew the fishing line tricks. They knew the psychological games. What could he change that they wouldn't anticipate? The frustration was compounded by doubt. For 3 weeks, his system, the method that had killed 47 Germans, produced nothing. Had he been lucky before? Were those early kills just Wehrmacht incompetence rather than his tactical brilliance? Maybe the specialists were showing him what real counter-sniper operations looked like, and his previous success had been fighting amateurs. He didn't allow himself to fully believe that. But the thought crept in during the long hours of observation, watching decoys that no one shot at. The psychological toll of stalemate exceeded the toll of constant action. When he was killing Germans regularly, he felt purposeful, effective, vindicated. Now, sitting in position for 10 hours watching nothing happen, the doubt accumulated. The weight of 47 kills without the validation of current success. The awareness that somewhere in these forests, German specialists were hunting him while he watched fake positions that they'd already identified as fake. On May 24th, he spotted them. Not directly. He was too careful to expose himself. But he noticed a pattern. 3 positions, spread across 600 meters, all with clear sight lines to his decoy network. The Germans weren't avoiding the sector. They were watching it. Watching him watch his decoys. Waiting for him to make a mistake. They'd reversed the dynamic completely. His decoys had become his own trap. The Germans knew where his decoys were, which meant they knew the general area where he'd position himself to observe those decoys. They weren't hunting the decoys. They were hunting him. He withdrew from the position immediately. Didn't return for 5 days. When he came back, the German observation posts were gone. They'd moved. But he'd learned the critical lesson. Against elite hunters, the system that worked on regular soldiers became a liability. He needed something they wouldn't anticipate. Something that didn't just adapt their tactics, but reverse them completely. The answer came from thinking about what the Germans expected him to do. They expected him to bait them with decoys. So what if he stopped baiting them? What if he made them bait themselves? Chapter 7. The Reversal. He started shooting at their decoys. May 30th, Sidorenko had spent 6 days studying German positions, identifying their patterns. The specialists operated differently from regular snipers. They set up observation posts that watched Soviet-held territory for days at a time, waiting for Soviet snipers to reveal themselves. And like him, they used decoys. German decoy methodology was sophisticated. They positioned helmets and partial uniforms in tactically sound locations, creating false sniper positions that looked legitimate. The goal was to make Soviet snipers shoot at the decoys, revealing their positions through muzzle flash. Sidorenko had never fallen for it. His training emphasized observation over engagement. But now he realized, what if he appeared to fall for it? The tactical reversal was elegant. He identified a German decoy position at 420 meters. Obviously fake, too exposed, too static, too perfect. The Germans probably thought no trained sniper would shoot at it, which meant they weren't watching it as carefully as they watched better hidden positions. At 1100 hours on May 30th, Sidorenko fired deliberately 5 meters to the left of the German decoy. Close enough to look like a failed shot. Close enough to seem like a Soviet sniper had tried to hit the decoy and missed. Then he watched. Within 2 minutes, a German soldier moved from concealment 300 meters behind the decoy. The man was rushing to investigate whether the decoy had been discovered. Standard response: if a Soviet sniper knows where your decoy is, you need to relocate it or adjust your observation pattern. But rushing meant exposure. Sidorenko killed him at 310 meters. Single shot. The German dropped before realizing the failed shot at the decoy had been deliberate bait. The reversal worked because it exploited German assumptions. They expected Soviet snipers to be less sophisticated, less patient, more prone to taking shots at obvious targets. By deliberately appearing to make a mistake, Sidorenko made the Germans believe they'd gained advantage. They rushed to exploit that advantage. That rush was fatal. Over the next 7 days, he killed 3 members of the specialist team using this method. Each time, he fired near a German decoy, never at it, always near it, creating the impression of failed shots. Each time, Germans moved to investigate, believing they'd identified a sloppy Soviet sniper. Each time, the movement revealed them. By June 6th, the remaining specialists withdrew from the sector. Sidorenko didn't know if they'd been reassigned or if they'd simply decided this sector was too dangerous. Either way, the German elite counter-sniper presence ended. He'd killed 3 of them in 1 week. The team that had killed 43 Soviet snipers over 18 months had lasted 7 days against a tactic they hadn't anticipated. The deeper lesson was about adaptation cycles. Germans adapted to his decoys by not shooting at them. So he adapted by making them think he was shooting at their decoys. The meta-deception, deceiving them about his awareness of their deception, nested layers of tactical psychology. But there was something else, something darker. He'd crossed a line somewhere during those 3 weeks of stalemate. The doubt, the frustration, the awareness that elite hunters were specifically targeting him. When he killed those 3 specialists, he felt something different. Not relief, not satisfaction, something colder. He was becoming better at this, not just tactically, psychologically. He was learning to think like a hunter who hunts hunters. That mindset was effective, but it changed something fundamental about how he saw the forest, saw positions, saw movement. Everything became threat assessment. Everything became calculation. By August 1944, he'd achieved 154 total kills. 18 months of operation without injury. The numbers validated the system completely. Soviet high command took notice. They pulled him from the front. They had different plans for him. Stories like this deserve to reach those who value them. If this account held meaning for you, consider helping others discover it. A like tells the algorithm to share this with similar audiences. Subscribing to the channel and enabling notifications ensures these stories reach you when new accounts are published. Your engagement becomes a form of historical preservation, connecting those who seek this knowledge with those who've taken time to document it properly. Chapter 8. The Teacher. He'd killed 309 men. Now, he had to teach others how to do the same. August 1944. Central Sniper School, 40 kilometers west of Moscow. Ivan Sidorenko, pulled from frontline operations after 18 months, stood in front of 127 Soviet snipers and tried to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. Teaching was harder than doing. On the front, he operated on instinct developed through 5 years as a forest ranger and 18 months of combat. He knew where to position decoys because the positions felt right. He knew when Germans would investigate because he could sense their decision-making. But instinct doesn't translate to doctrine. You can't teach feeling. So he had to articulate the structure he hadn't consciously recognized. The first week was decoy construction. Measurements, stake heights, helmet mounting angles. The students found it tedious. They wanted to shoot, not build fake positions. Sidorenko explained, "The shot is the easy part. Anyone can pull a trigger. The system is the weapon." The second week covered positioning geometry, 300-meter radius networks, priority versus standard versus bait decoys, overlapping observation fields, mathematical patterns that his brain had calculated instinctively, now broken down into teachable doctrine. The third week, psychological operations, leaving kill decoys, creating false security, using enemy equipment for doctrinal confusion. The students began understanding. This wasn't about marksmanship. This was about making the enemy reveal himself. The fourth week brought the biggest challenge, teaching patience. Modern soldiers, especially young soldiers, wanted action. They wanted movement, engagement, results. The idea of sitting motionless for 8, 10, 12 hours watching positions where nothing happened felt wasteful. Sidorenko had to explain what he'd learned in forests before the war. Patience isn't waiting. Patience is hunting extended across time. The wolf doesn't run down the deer. The wolf waits for the deer to make one mistake. You're not waiting for the enemy. You're letting the enemy wait himself into exhaustion. Some students understood immediately. Others struggled through the entire 6 weeks. By September, 113 of 127 students graduated. 89% pass rate. Each graduate received certification in Position Maskirovka Method 6, the official designation for Sidorenko's decoy system in Soviet doctrine. But the burden shifted. He wasn't just responsible for his own survival anymore. These 113 snipers would deploy using his methods. If they died because his teaching was inadequate, those deaths were his responsibility as much as the 309 kills were his achievement. He couldn't return to the front, not because command prohibited it, but because if he died, the knowledge died with him. His survival had become institutional necessity rather than personal goal. Chapter 9. The Legacy. By autumn 1944, hundreds of Soviet snipers were using decoys. The Germans couldn't adapt fast enough. The method Sidorenko developed alone in February 1943 spread across the Eastern Front through official channels and informal networks. Snipers taught other snipers. Units shared techniques. By October 1944, decoy operations had become standard Soviet countersniper doctrine from Leningrad to the Balkans. The statistical validation came later, after the war. Soviet military research divisions compared 500 decoy-trained snipers against 500 traditionally trained snipers operating during the same period, 1944 to 1945. Control for experience level, equipment quality, sector assignments. The results were conclusive. Decoy-trained snipers showed 12% higher survival rates, 23% higher kill counts. 12% doesn't sound dramatic, but across 500 snipers operating for 12 months, that translated to 60 lives saved. Men who came home instead of dying in frozen forests. 60 families who didn't receive death notifications. The mathematics of small percentages across large populations. 23% higher kills meant the difference between marginal effectiveness and tactical dominance in counter-sniper operations. German counter-sniper units began reporting impossible to operate in decoy-saturated sectors by late 1944, according to Wehrmacht documents captured after the war. But the statistics carried weight Sidorenko hadn't anticipated. Of the 127 snipers he personally trained, 73 died before May 1945. 54 survived the war. 57% survival rate was extraordinary compared to the 6-day average lifespan from early 1943. But it still meant 73 men he'd trained, men he'd taught, men he'd certified as ready for combat, died in forests across Eastern Europe. He read every casualty report, memorized every name. Boris Kuznetsov, killed April 3, 1945, outside Berlin. Anatoly Volkov, killed February 18, 1945, during East Prussian offensive. Mikhail Sokolov, Killed March 22, 1945, 3 weeks after graduation. Each report included tactical assessment. Most died to artillery, not counter-snipers. The decoy method protected them from German hunters, but not from random shells, not from massed fire, not from the chaos of conventional warfare. Sidorenko had given them tools for one specific threat. The front had 1,000 others. The guilt of survival compounded. He'd achieved 309 kills and lived. They'd used his methods and died anyway. Was teaching the right choice? Or should he have stayed on the front, continued operating, continued refining the system in real combat rather than classroom instruction? No answer satisfied that question. Both choices carried cost. Teaching multiplied effectiveness. 113 graduates applying his methods created more impact than one sniper operating alone. But teaching also meant distance from the front, safety behind lines while students died. German adaptation attempts appeared in capture documents. Wehrmacht countersniper headquarters issued procedures for decoy-saturated zones in December 1944. The directive recommended extended observation periods, 12+ hours, probe fire with machine guns before sniper investigation, avoidance of tactically perfect positions that seemed too obvious. The directive acknowledged implicitly that German counter-sniper doctrine had been compromised. They were adapting, but reactively. The innovation belonged to the Soviets. The Germans were responding to Soviet methodology rather than innovating their own. Post-war analysis by Western military historians questioned whether the success should be attributed to Sidorenko individually or to broader Soviet tactical evolution. The debate missed the point. One man developed the method. Soviet military structure systematized it, taught it, deployed it at scale. Both were necessary. Individual innovation became institutional practice. The method remained classified until 1991. When Soviet archives opened after the Cold War ended, the world learned what German countersnipers had faced. 309 kills by one sniper using decoys. 12% survival improvement. 23% effectiveness increase. Numbers that changed modern sniper doctrine globally. But Sidorenko never claimed credit for others' kills. The 113 graduates, the hundreds who learned secondhand, the thousands of German casualties to decoy-based operations. He refused to count any of them as his victories. 309. That was his number. The only number he accepted responsibility for. Chapter 10. The Man, 37:00, 40:00, 450 words. He survived the war. Many didn't. May 1946. Ivan Sidorenko returned to Smolensk region and resumed work as a forest ranger. Same forest he'd worked before the war. Same 12-hour shifts tracking wolves. Same solitude. As if 4 years of war had been an interruption in a life that otherwise continued unchanged. He refused interviews. Declined invitations to military ceremonies. Didn't attend veteran reunions. When local officials tried to organize recognition events, he left town until they stopped asking. His neighbors knew he'd been a soldier. They didn't know about the 309. The one exception came in 1967. A military historian from Moscow spent 6 months convincing him to give a single interview. Sidorenko agreed to answer questions for 1 hour. No cameras. No recording. A historian could take notes. When asked about the 309 confirmed kills, Sidorenko's response was recorded in the historian's notes. They were hunting us. I learned to hunt hunters. The forest taught me to wait. The Germans taught me to think. Which one killed them? Both. Neither. Maybe they killed themselves by being what they were. When asked whether he felt pride in the achievement, he didn't answer for 40 seconds. Then, pride is for victories. I survived. Others didn't. That's not pride. That's accident of circumstance. The interview ended after 53 minutes when Sidorenko stood and said he'd fulfilled his obligation. He died in 1994, age 73. No military funeral. No state recognition. Buried in a village cemetery outside Smolensk with a simple headstone listing name and dates. No mention of military service. No mention of 309. But his methodology didn't die with him. Modern sniper schools, Russian, American, British, Israeli, teach variations of decoy operations and counter-sniper curriculum. The specific techniques have evolved. Modern materials replaced wooden stakes and German helmets. Kevlar decoys. Realistic mannequins with thermal signatures. Electronic sensors that detect when decoys are fired upon. But the core principle remains unchanged. Make the enemy reveal himself by attacking something that looks valuable but isn't real. The desperate innovation of one forest ranger in February 1943 became permanent military doctrine globally. 50 years of classified Soviet sniper training. 20-plus years of declassified analysis and adaptation by Western militaries. Doctrines written. Textbooks published. Training courses structured around principles Sidorenko developed while pinned down for 9 hours, too terrified to move, watching a German helmet that wouldn't reveal itself. 309 men died because Ivan Sidorenko learned patience in forest tracking wolves, and then applied that patience to hunting men. The weight of that never left him. He carried it back to the forests after the war. He carried it through 48 years of civilian life. He carried it to his grave. The method survived him. The man did not survive the method. War changes what it touches. Even when you win. Even when you survive. Even when you return to the same forests, the same work, the same life. Something remains different. Something that patience and forest solitude never quite heal. 309 is a number. But each number was a man. Each man was someone's son, brother, father. Sidorenko knew that. He always knew that. That knowledge was the real weight he carried. Not pride. Not accomplishment. Knowledge. Stories like this deserve to reach those who value them. If this account held meaning for you, consider helping others discover it. A like tells the algorithm to share this with similar audiences. Subscribing to the channel and enabling notifications ensures these stories reach you when new accounts are published. Your engagement becomes a form of historical preservation, connecting those who seek this knowledge with those who've taken time to document it properly.